This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. Go. Sleep badly. Any questions? Hesitate to call. It's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and this film is lit. Hello, and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We, no Guess Who this week, for reasons that I'll explain later, but we have every other segment. Quite a bit to talk about. This is a switch episode. I read Bodies Are Where You Find Them, and then we both watched Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. If you have not done that recently, we're going to give you a brief summary of just the film in Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Okay, this is sourced from Wikipedia. There are, as per the usual, a few things that I am not sure the Wikipedia author got correct.
Exactly right, yeah. It's so interesting.
Harry Lockhart unintentionally wins a screen test in New York City by showing remorse in an audition over a botched burglary he committed, which casting director Dabney Shaw mistakes for method acting. He is sent to Los Angeles for a further screen test. At a party there, Harry meets his childhood crush Harmony Lane and gay Perry Van Shrike, a private investigator hired to give him on-the-job tutelage for his screen test. Party host Harlan Dexter, a retired actor, has recently resolved a feud over his wife's inheritance with his estranged daughter Veronica. During a stakeout at Big Bear Lake Cabin, Perry and Harry see a car being dumped in the lake. Noticing a female body in the trunk, Perry shoots the lock in a rescue attempt, but accidentally hits the corpse. They decide against reporting it as it will appear he killed her. Believing Harry is a private investigator, Harmony tells him of her sister, Jenna, who supposedly killed herself. He finds the lake corpse identified as Veronica in his bathroom and dumps it with Perry, but soon discovers Jenna used Harmony's credit card to hire Perry. Harry goes to see Harmony, who accidentally cuts his finger off when she slams the door after finding out he lied about being a private investigator. At a party where Harmony is working, Mr. Frying Pan and Mr. Fire, the two men from the lake, beat Harry to cease his investigation. Harmony and Harry follow them to Perry's latest stakeout. She goes to warn Perry, leaving Harry sleeping in the car, ending in Mr. Frying Pan being killed by an armed food cart operator. A pink-haired girl, affiliated with Mr. Frying Pan and Mr. Fire, steals Harmony's car and unwittingly drives an unconscious Harry to her home. Mr. Fire arrives and kills her, then Harry kills him. Harry meets Harmony at his hotel, where she reveals she told Jenna that Harlan was her real father to diminish the pain of their sexually abusive father. She also reveals that she slept with Harry's best friend in high school, so he throws her out. Hearing of Harmony's supposed disappearance, Harry and Perry investigate a mental hospital owned by Harlan. They discover Veronica was locked in there by him to be replaced by Pink Hair Girl to end the inheritance feud. Harry unintentionally kills a murderous orderly, and then they are captured by Harlan. Harry contacts Harmony, who steals the van with Veronica's corpse. The men escape and are shot by the same bullet. Harry then manages to kill Harlan. In the hospital, the trio learn Jenna committed suicide after witnessing Harlan having sex with Veronica's replacement, believing her new father was also incestuous. Perry slaps Jenna's father, who is bedridden. In a closing address to the camera, Harry announces that he now works for Perry, while Perry implies that the two of them are also engaged. I don't remember that
line.
At all.
I don't.
If that was implied at the end, I did not catch it.
If it all implied, if it's implied, it's definitely implied jokingly. Like he may
Yes,
make
yeah.
that as a joke. I don't
Yeah.
even remember that.
And
he
which
would-
that is like the kind of joke that a
Yes,
character
yeah.
would make, but I don't remember that at
I don't
all.
even remember it coming up as a joke, but
Yeah.
maybe I just missed it. But because I have thoughts on those segments anyways, which we'll get to. So Katie has like I said, we don't have a guess who. Again, I'll get into the reasons why during Katie's questions here before too long. But Katie does have quite a few questions, so we'll get to those in Was That in the Book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
What?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So the movie opens up with a couple little kids putting on like a magic show for other people in their neighborhood.
Yes.
So I was wondering if anything from that opening sequence with our little kid magic show was from the book.
Yes. And initially, we do not realize what this is. If you're watching this movie for the first time, you would not know what this is because, and the movie makes a point of that later, as Harry, who narrates the film, says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't explain that part in the beginning, blah, blah, blah." That is Harry's backstory, him as a child, him and Harmony. Harmony was the girl in the box. None of that entire backstory, none of that comes from the book. It's entirely a movie's invention because the main character in the book is Mike Shane. That's we've mentioned in the prequel. It's Mike Shane Mysteries. It's a whole series. He's the main character, and he is a private investigator. We don't in this book we get nothing of his backstory in terms of like childhood or anything like that. And it's very much. We'll get to this here again more. In the next question you have, but Harry is not really analogous with Mike Shane.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to it in your next question, kind of a little bit more, I guess. But
One of the other main characters in this movie is Val Kilmer's character Perry, who is also sometimes referred to as Gay Perry.
yes, that's his nickname.
Yeah, his nickname, Gay Perry. And he is a gay man, and much is made of this throughout the film.
Yes.
So I was curious if there are any gay characters in this book.
So there are none that are mentioned from my memory. If they are, they're only in passing, like some like side character or something, maybe. But I don't even recall that. And so kind of getting back to what I was saying, we really don't have a directly analogous character specifically to our lead in the book, who is Mike Shane, the private investigator. The kind of most similar counterparts we have is that the book kind of is a two-hander, sort of, where Mike Shane is a private investigator, and his friend who kind of helps him during this whole case is named Tim Rourke, who is a reporter.
Okay.
And the two of them kind of most similarly coincide. Like, they get into the same hijinks that, or, you know, they are the two leads who are trying to, like, kind of work through this murder mystery.
Almost kind of a similar buddy-ish
Kind
setup.
of, yeah. It's mainly focused on Mike Shane, and Tim Rourke kind of comes and goes, but he's there for most of it, similar to how Perry kind of comes in and out of the story here and there in the film. But again, it's kind of different because in the film, Perry is a private investigator and Harry is a former thief turned not even actor at this point. Like, well, we find out at the end that it was all a ruse anyways, and they just brought him in so that they could get Colin Farrell's they could pay Colin Farrell less by pretending they were going to hire some no name so they could negotiate him down. But yeah, there's not really a direct analog. I guess Perry is closest to Mike Shane because he is a private investigator, but their personalities are not really similar. We'll talk more about that later. But neither of our main characters I mentioned be gay. Specifically, Mike Shane in the book is married to a woman, is interested in women throughout the book as far as we can tell. And Tim Rourke, I don't think it's ever brought up. I think he does mention being attracted to women, but it's not really like
it's not
expounded upon. It's not important. Yeah.
Okay.
I also, just to touch on that real quick, we mentioned in the prequel episode that this movie won, speaking of the gay characters, this movie won a GLAAD award, or was nominated for like best film at the GLAAD Awards the year this came out. And it's, I did think it was interesting. And the main reason I think it still works is, you know, this movie has some definitely, and we'll get into some of it throughout, it's you know, it's got its problematic elements. It is a Shane Black film. But it is the depiction of Gay Perry is not a one-note stereotype of a gay man,
right?
Which I think is one of the things that, you know, the LGBTQ community was looking for breadcrumbs back then of like, and I say back then, it was 2005, but like looking for, like, hey, look, there's a gay character in this movie who's not like the token stereotype gay character
Right.
in
Yeah.
the movie.
If you could think back to 2005, there are problematic elements with this
Yes.
character in this film.
Namely, one being that I, as far as I know, Val Kilmer is straight.
Yes.
Completely. I could be wrong about that. I don't know
Yes.
for sure, but and so yeah.
But it is a departure from the types of gay characters that were being depicted
Yes.
on screen at this time.
Yeah.
Mostly like very effeminate.
Very feminine,
kind of
side characters who just are there to like be sassy. Basically.
Think the original Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, Will and Grace,
that kind of stuff.
Thing.
It was kind of in that time period where that was most of the, and not all. There were examples of way better representation than this that existed, but it is, again, it's at least something where you're not getting just the cookie cutter Hollywood's version of a gay character. So
this movie is kind of told in like a non-linear
kind of
setup.
It's told from there's like a framing narrative of Harry recounting the events of last Christmas.
Yeah.
He says.
So even though we kind of like after the opening part with them as kids, we go to the party in LA and then we like do some flashing back to find out how he ended up at this party.
Yeah.
And so we find out that he was in New York and he and a friend were robbing a toy store.
Yes.
And they set the alarm off on accident. And they had to run, and the cops were chasing them. And there was a woman who came out of her apartment onto a fire escape and was shooting at them.
Yes.
Does a lady ever shoot at anyone from a fire escape in this book? Because I feel like that's the kind of thing that could happen in like a hard-boiled 1950s detective novel.
I could see that. No. Nothing like that happens. Specifically, nothing like that scene happens because, again, our main character doesn't have, as far as I know, a thief, any sort of backstory where something like that would happen. But then on top of that, just more generally, there's actually a startling lack of gunfire in this book in general. Not none, but it's not a lot. Less than I would have anticipated, I guess. But we'll get to that more later. So, but yeah, no, nobody shoots at anybody from a fire escape.
Okay. All right. So then back at this LA party, we see that Harmony is also there, which we don't really know anything about her yet.
Yeah, we don't know who she is yet.
Yeah, but she's also there and she's looking around in another room at this party where there's nobody else, and then she lays down on the couch and goes to sleep.
Nap, I guess. Maybe she was drunk. I don't know.
Yeah. But then another guy comes in and starts like feeling her up.
Yeah.
And then Harry comes in
Yeah.
and at least attempts to put a stop to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Do any of the characters in this book ever stop a guy from assaulting a woman and then get beat up?
No, this is definitely a better in the movie moment for me. I thought this scene is great. Mainly, I love the hard cut from, because Harry comes in and he's like talking a big game and pretending to be a badass.
Yeah.
He's like, you and me, we can handle this outside. Like whatever you like. He's like really trying to like. You could tell Harry is the kind of guy who has gotten through and out of a lot of things in his life by talking.
Yes.
And by being a guy who can talk well and can kind of sell some bullshit or whatever. So he is attempting that in this situation, but I love that, but we don't really know that about him at this point yet. Like he may be able to back it up. We don't know because this is like kind of a very early in our introduction to Harry. But yeah, he's talking all this game, and then it just hard cuts to him getting his head slammed against the ground outside, which is very funny and not in the book at all. There is a kind of similar moment that I have a note about later and better in the book. That kind of parallels it in the sense that our main character gets the shit kicked out of him in an interesting way, but it is not really similar apart from them getting beaten up. So
okay. But we catch up with Harmony later. He goes and finds her at a bar, and she corrects his grammar. Which becomes like a recurring joke.
Yes.
And then we realize that she is someone he was friends with in the past.
Because she recognized him, but he didn't recognize her. And she's like, Harry, you idiot, get over it. And he's like, oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. So they were like good friends in high school. So
And since childhood, because again, she was the little
yes.
girl in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
magic
yeah.
act at the beginning. Yeah.
I assume there's a leading lady of some sort in this book because I feel like there usually is in this type
Yeah,
of
you would
book.
assume, yeah.
So is she someone that the hero was involved with in the past, like a high school sweetheart or anything?
So no, and there really is no leading lady in this.
Hmm.
Shane is married. We talked about in the prequel that he was married
Mm-hmm.
throughout some of the books, and at some point she gets fridged.
Yeah.
It must be after this one, because she is alive in this one. Her name is Phyllis, I believe. And the book actually opens with him and with the two of them, him and his wife packing to go on vacation together, like they're going up to New York.
Yeah.
This whole book actually takes place in Miami. The movie moves it to LA.
Mm-hmm.
But the story takes place in Miami in the book. And they're going up to New York on a vacation. But then he gets a call that sets him off on this case. And there's like a whole bunch of thing where she's like, oh God, not, like you can tell this happens a lot where they have plans and his job as a PI ruins everything. But yes, she's only in the very beginning of the book and then is mentioned briefly throughout. And there are other women that show up here and there, but they usually end up either dead or have very brief appearances.
Okay.
So this was definitely a better in the movie change for me. I really enjoyed kind of the slow reveal of their backstory and how they knew each other and initially not knowing that and that sort of thing. I also appreciated that the movie did add a kind of a woman with some agency. Like I said, the women in the book are all kind of just set dressing.
Mm-hmm.
They're to be used by the men who are doing the important things. The movie is not remotely free of misogyny, and we'll get to some of that later, but it is significantly better in the book, in my opinion, in the sense that we at least have this kind of interesting self-possessed woman
Yeah.
who is part of the main plot.
She's got her
and
own
has
thing
her own
going on.
motivations and her
Yeah.
own kind of desires, and is not just there to, like I said, be an accoutrement to what the men are doing
Right.
entirely.
So we mentioned in the summary that Harry and Perry are on a stakeout and they see a car get
Flies over their head.
Yeah, flies over their heads into the lake.
Yeah.
And then there's a dead woman in the trunk of the
Yeah.
car. Is there ever a dead woman in a car trunk in this book? And does a car get driven into a lake?
So neither of those two specific things happen. There's a dead
Okay.
woman in a car several times, but I think she's usually in the back seat. We'll get to that. But so the initial introduction of the dead body is pretty different in the movie and the book. And I'll get to this more later about what this movie does versus the book and how they're similar. We're kind of in specifics right now, and I haven't given the broad view. I think I have a note about later where I'll kind of talk about more broadly what is what, and it is what I expected from what I said in the prequel, that it's the murder plot, the conspiracy is from the book, everything else is not, basically.
Yeah.
For the most part. So the way that the dead body shows up is pretty different. In the book, the character of the daughter shows up this is the call that he gets when they're packing for vacation. And she ends up showing up at his apartment, drugged out of her mind. She's like, well, he thinks she's drunk initially, but then realizes eventually that she's been like slipped a Mickey. He calls it's got the actual name. They called it Mickey something, like a full name, like a Mickey. I can't remember now. But I guess that's where Mickey came from. But it's like calls it like a Mickey.
Yeah, I didn't know that was like a shortened.
Yeah, it's Mickey something, like Mickey James, or it's not that, but it's something like that. But she's drugged and she comes in and she's trying to like tell him something, and she's like, oh, I have some information, but she's like incoherent and stumbling, and he ends up putting her in his bedroom because his wife comes back and he's trying to like work this case without her knowing, and then also this girl's there and it's like weird and awkward, so he puts her, like lets her pass out on his bed. And then he goes to do something, and then when he returns, she's dead. She had been strangled in his apartment, like in his bed, while he was gone. So that's how he ends up with this body the first time. More happens from there. I like both versions. I thought that I really did enjoy the book's introduction of the mystery of this woman showing up and like having some sort of information, but being so incoherent that he can't really tell what's going on or whatever. And then again, the twist of like he leaves for like 5 minutes and comes back and she has been murdered, and you're like, wait, in his own apartment is like a very interesting kind of conceit for the story. But I also, the movie's version here I think works really well, where they're trailing this car, and then a car goes flying into a thing. I will say the only thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to me in this scene in the movie is that and Wikipedia said Perry notices a body in the trunk.
Yeah.
How?
I don't know.
How?
Because I wasn't sure about that when we were watching it either. I was like, how did he know?
Well, and there's a detail earlier in the film where when the car is driving, I swear Harry says something like, "Do you hear that sound coming from the car?" Which to me implies that she's alive in the trunk, like banging on the trunk.
Yeah.
But then they say that her neck was broken.
Yeah.
And that's what killed. I don't know. It's a little confusing to me what exactly all transpired for her to be dead in the trunk and for them to know and for Perry to know about it. Anyways, so that all plays out a little bit different. I like both versions. I think both versions work. They're just kind of slightly different. But yeah, those specific details do not happen in the book.
Okay. Well, then shortly after that, because Harry kind of handles that whole thing badly.
Yes. Because the whole details is Perry shoots the lock open on the trunk to get the trunk open, and then they realize afterwards that he shot the body.
Yeah, so it's gonna look like he
shot her. So then Harry, as they're they need to get out of there. Harry's like, because he's seen it in movies or whatever, he throws his gun into the lake.
Yeah,
and Perry's like, "Why did you? Now they're gonna find my gun, you idiot." But yeah,
yeah. But at some point in all of that, they have a great exchange, and Perry says to him, "Look up idiot in the dictionary. You know what you'll find." And Harry's like, "A picture of me?" And he says, "No, the definition of the word idiot, which you fucking are."
That is not in the book at all. Absolutely better in the movie. That line and Val Kilmer's delivery will never not make me bust out laughing. It's maybe my favorite line. It's the top voted quote on Wikipedia or on IMDb for a reason. It's everybody's favorite line from this movie because it's just hilarious. And again, Val Kilmer delivers it just fantastically. But no, not in the book. And it very much feels like that is, you can tell. I understand why you asked this, but it also to me very much feels like modern comedy writing.
Yes, absolutely.
Shane Black's dialogue to a T. This is the kind of stuff Shane Black writes, which I don't know if you've ever actually seen another Shane Black movie other than this.
I don't think so. I think we talked about that in the prequel.
Yeah, that's fair. But that's all of his dialogue is that kind of like subversion of expectations of cliches and stuff. He loves to do that kind of stuff and like deconstruct tropes and cliches in like silly ways or whatever. So yeah, doesn't come from the book, and there's not really anything of that style. There's not no humor in the book, but there's nothing that kind of. That is a very early 2000s and even current humor, but that is very much more modern style of humor than the book engages in.
So then following that, Harry receives a call that apparently Harmony has committed suicide.
Yes.
And he's really sad about it, and then he goes up to his hotel room, and then Harmony knocks on his door, and she's alive.
Yes, surprise.
At any point in the book, do they ever think that someone died, committed suicide, was killed, whatever, but then that person actually turns up alive?
Oh, not really. So now I think about it, there is kind of one instance of it, but not nearly as dramatically as the movie does it. There is one character who is a maid so the movie's equivalent. In the movie, Harlan Dexter is the rich guy who threw the party, and with the daughter with the who was suing him and all that sort of stuff. That whole plot comes from the book. The book's equivalent of that character is a guy named Stallings. Instead of Harlan Dexter, and he has a maid who at one point Mike Shane is trying to get information from. She disappears, and Mike Shane is worried that they killed her to like
to hush her up,
basically. But then realize, because at one point there's a body that's found in the bay near the rich guy, the Stallings mansion, and he assumes and I assumed too, reading that it was going to be her. It ends up not. He goes into the morgue and finds that body. It ends up not being her. And then later at the end of the book, there's a revelation that actually she was just being held prisoner in the mental hospital, which we'll get to.
Oh.
But so she is alive. But it's not really dramatically revealed in the same way where like we think like a main important character like was dead and then they like surprise they're alive. Not really anything like that. So
Okay. Then shortly after that, Robert Downey Jr. is Harry is in his bathroom in his hotel room, and he turns around, and sitting in his shower is the dead body of the girl from the lake.
Yeah.
Does a body ever show up in someone's shower?
So no, but this does. I think this idea. I would argue this idea comes from the book, but it's nothing specifically like this, where there's just like turns around and there's a body in his shower. But I think it kind of combines two scenes from the book. So in the movie, this is the second time they found the body. They found the body with it going into the lake earlier, and then they leave and they drive away and then leave, and then that body gets dropped back in Harry's hotel room later that night or the next day or whatever. In the book, I think it's combining the scene I talked about earlier where he's in his apartment. Mike Shane is in his apartment, and then the girl is there, and then he leaves, and when he comes back, she's dead and in his apartment. That's her being in his apartment part of it. But there's also a scene in the movie or in the book that is similar where they get rid of the body the body disappears. That's the whole thing too. The body ends up in his apartment. He's like, what the hell? Who somebody got in here and killed her. He contacts Tim. They're trying to figure out what to do. They're going to go hide the body or like move the body out of there so they can like kind of try to solve this whole mystery. But as they're going to hide the body, Mike Shane goes to leave and go do some stuff, and he's going to have Tim do it because he knows he's being followed. So he wants Tim to go hide the body. And then they meet up later, and Tim's like, oh, you took care of that body thing apparently, huh? And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, there was no body in your apartment.
Well,
and so the body was gone. It just disappeared out of his apartment. And he's like, what the hell? And then later he's driving somewhere and he gets hit by a car, and a person gets out of the car and throws the body like next to his car and drives away to like try to plant the body on him again, basically.
Yeah.
And that's similar to this. So I think it's like kind of those two moments kind of combined into one.
Right.
Because in the book, when he gets hit by the car and they like plant the body on him, that's the second time they end up with the body. But it happens like out in public. But the first scene in the book happens in his apartment. So this is kind of like a mashup of those two scenes, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like essentially it like puts it in his apartment or / hotel room, but it's like the second time they've seen this body and they're trying to plant it on him for the second time or whatever. So anyways, definitely inspired by the book, but just not identical.
Yeah. But then Harry and Perry get rid of the body. They wrap it up in like a blanket or a rug or something. And they just like leave it on the side of the road somewhere. Yes. Does anybody in the book ever leave a body on the side of the road?
Yes, the movie nailed this. Shane and Rourke do leave the body of the dead woman after the second time he gets it. They do just leave it on some person's lawn, actually, in the book. They're just like, and they know they have like X amount of time, but they need to get rid of it. I can't remember exactly why they decide to just leave it, but anyways, they just leave it on somebody's lawn so that it'll be found, and then blah blah blah. But yeah, basically they do just leave it somewhere.
So then we kind of go back to Harmony and Harry, and she has found out that Harry is not actually a PI, as he kind of allowed her to believe earlier. Yeah. And she gets mad, she slams the door, and it cuts his finger off.
Yes.
Does anyone in the book get their finger cut off?
No, nobody gets their finger cut off. Does not happen in the book, but this is a great running gag in the film that I do really enjoy, is that he gets it cut off and then it gets it sewed back on, and then it gets ripped off again, and then a whole bunch of stuff happens, which we'll talk about. But yeah, great running gag, does not happen in the book.
Also, I just have a question. Can they literally just sew an entire finger back on?
As far as I understand, the answer to that question is yes.
Like bone and everything?
Yes. My understanding, especially depending on where it is, I've always heard at least that you are literally supposed to put it on ice and go to an emergency room immediately, because they can, in some instances, reattach it.
I don't know if I like that. I mean, I guess that's good if your
Better than
finger
better,
gets cut
yeah.
off, but
Yeah.
yeah. So this is maybe
It may be it may be a case where like you lose functionality or like feeling or something,
Right,
but you
yeah,
still
yeah,
have.
yeah.
I don't actually know,
Yeah.
or maybe not. It may regrow nerve.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but I know that's a thing where you can reattach fingers. Sorry.
medical professional listeners, please weigh in.
Yeah.
So this is my next question is even more of a kind of broad. I was trying to be a little bit broad with my questions because I
'Cause you
knew
that it wasn't.
that it was not very similar. But this is maybe an even more broad question. And what I'm wondering is if either Harry or Perry, because they're two like kind of main characters,
Yes.
are anything like the main character in the book, Michael Shane. Because I know that character isn't in the movie,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering if anything came through or if there was any like inspiration.
Yeah. And so, like I said, kind of how I alluded to earlier, not really. I like I said, Perry's kind of close-ish because he's a PI,
Mhm.
but neither of them really feel like Shane in the book to me. Shane is like this whip-smart, tough-talking, hard-boiled detective. He's
Yeah.
like the quintessential this kind of detective.
Yeah, like that character.
Yeah,
trope.
he's like quintessentially that character trope. But he's not really like sarcastic or quippy or smarmy like both Harry and Perry are. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I wouldn't say there's really much of anything about either of their characters that feels like Mike Shane, other than the
Mhm.
fact literally that like Perry's job is a PI.
Right.
And like Perry does seem to be like maybe competent in the same way that Shane is. Like he
just seems like he knows what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing, and he definitely like he figures out some of the stuff like kind of in his head like before other people and stuff like that. I would say that's maybe the closest thing because that's kind of the whole thing is that at the end of the book, Shane kind of does his Columbo like this is what all happened.
Yeah.
Is Sherlock whatever.
Here's how I solved the case.
Here's how I solved the murder. So like I would say that's kind of similar, but other than that, like personality wise, I wouldn't really say that either of them feel particularly.
Okay.
Maybe they drink a lot. We'll get to that, but like maybe they drink and they don't drink as much. I have a note about it later, but
Yeah.
it was wild. We'll get to it. It's crazy.
Gotta love that mid-century care for your liver.
I could not. It's insane.
Okay, so then moving forward in our story, Perry has been hired to tail this girl in the park, who we find out later is connected to the whole thing, but we don't know that at this time. We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
And then Harmony is bringing Harry back from the hospital, and he's like loopy on his pain meds.
Yeah.
So she is going to warn Perry that he's in danger, basically.
That it's like a setup.
Yeah, that it's a setup. Yeah, but she leaves Harry in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole thing goes south.
Yeah.
And
Perry almost gets killed.
Yeah, Perry almost gets killed, and the pink-haired girl that he was tailing like freaks out and runs, and she comes across the car and basically just takes it and drives home with Harry in the back seat.
Yeah.
At any point in this book, does someone pass out in the back of a car that then gets stolen and driven to a secondary location?
No.
Okay.
Nah, yeah. Not that I recall. At least I do not believe that happens. There are some cars that are stolen, specifically a delivery truck. Towards the end, Mike Shane steals a delivery truck to do.
Okay. That's kind of similar to the coffin.
When what's her name steals the mortuary.
The big truck with the coffin.
It's not a mortuary, I guess. It's from
the crematorium.
No, it's actually from the mental hospital, I think. Because they had her coffin in the I think it's from the mental hospital. That's kind of similar. I wouldn't say that. I don't think there's like a chase in the book from my memory, but he does steal. He's like we'll get to it later. But at one point, Mike Shane is a wanted man, and he has to escape, and he ends up hiding by like pretending to be like working in the back of a UPS truck, essentially, and then he ends up stealing the UPS truck to like get away.
Okay,
but which is kind of similar to that. But no, nobody passes out in a car and then wakes up like in a mysterious location.
I was really trying hard to like pick things out.
Yeah, like very like kind of broad, like mechanical things
that I thought could potentially have come from a 1940s, 1950s hard-boiled detective
and
novel.
you got some of them for sure. You definitely got some.
So then we're at the pink-haired girl's house, and one of the like thug guys
Yes,
comes in.
Mr. Fire
Mr.
or Frying Pan,
Mr.
one
Fire,
of the two.
Mr. Frying Pan, don't remember. And
Those characters, the equivalents names in the book, I can't remember. I think it's like Jerry, but one of them, my favorite. There's this big muscle guy. His name is Donk. I think it's a nickname.
I love that.
But his name is literally just Donk. It's incredible. But they're kind of equivalent to there's like two muscly guys that are working. They're working for a character that doesn't really have an equivalent in the movie, but
yeah,
similar idea.
So what I'm wanting to know is if there's anything in the book that is similar to the scene where Harry's hiding under her bed and then this girl gets killed and like falls down right by him and they're like looking each other in the eyes as she's dying.
Yeah, no, that does nothing like that happens, but I did really like this scene in the movie. So a lot of the violence that happens in the book, and particularly the violence that happens to women in the book, happens off screen, which to me, I think you can make an argument both ways, but to me, it makes it feel less upsetting and less meaningful. Because tons of women, I say tons, a handful of women get killed or whatever. I think it's two, maybe more. I can't remember, but several women get killed or whatever. But it all happens. We see their bodies.
We don't have to bear witness to it.
We don't have to bear witness to it. We don't have to like deal with that at all in the book. It's just sort of the bodies show up and then, you know, as the title implies, bodies are where we find them. Like the bodies just show up and then we deal with their corpses. We don't really deal with the fact that they were people at any point. We never meet them alive. I don't even think most of them, any of them, maybe. I can't remember. And so to me, I thought this scene in the movie made the violence happening specifically to women more immediate and terrifying. And I really, specifically, I really like right after that when our Harry grabs the gun. The guy comes back in to like get rid of the body or whatever, and Harry is sitting there and he grabs the gun and shoots the bad guy. I really liked Robert Downey Jr.'s reaction to having killed that guy and like not know, like when he calls Perry and he's like, Perry, I killed a guy, and he's like, I don't know, and he's like doesn't really know how to handle it. I think all of that scene, I think, added a lot of gravitas to the story that the book kind of lacked. Again, us watching her die and Robert Downey Jr. dealing with that. And again, we don't really know this character, so it's not like perfect or anything. She's just kind of a disposable, like she just shows up in like two scenes and we don't really know who she is in the movie at this point.
Yeah.
And then she just dies. So it's not like we have an attachment to her or anything. But again, at least we're seeing, again, it makes it more real. It makes it, to me, feel more, gives it more weight in a way that the book just kind of like,
yeah,
who cares?
Yeah.
You know, like
I agree. I liked this scene too, because the movie overall is, I mean, it's a comedy.
Yes, it's very much a comedy, but it's a dark comedy.
It's a dark comedy, but it's quippy and it's self-aware.
Yeah.
And it's sarcastic.
To its own detriment at times.
You know.
Yeah.
But this scene, I thought that, you know, the director and everything, they really allowed that to kind of like drop.
Yeah.
Out of the bottom of the scene, and you kind of drop along with it as the viewer. Yeah.
No, and it makes it very clear that there are stakes here, that this isn't just a fun, like, wacky adventure. Again, because until this point, like, we've seen bodies, but we didn't ever met the girl from the beginning whose body we saw was just like a body that showed up and like, who is this, blah, blah, blah. And the movie will go on to continue to kind of treat, you know, her, you know, in like a slapstick manner, like especially the first girl's body and everything like that. It's a very irreverent film, but I do think that it needed at least one moment like this where it at least tries to make some of this feel a little real, to at least to some extent. I don't know, maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but to me, I appreciated the attempt to kind of ground this and go, no, actually people are, you know, this is not just like a fun thing. I don't know.
Yeah. And then when he has to shoot the guy immediately after that, and Robert Downey Jr. does a really good job
he's great
with this role. Yeah. And you can just kind of see in his face of like not like he's outside of himself.
His numbness. He is like when he like the interaction I mean, it's incredibly traumatizing because he has to like stop her from making noise so she
Yeah.
doesn't give him away. Like he covers her mouth because he's hiding under the bed, and if she starts making noise or whatever, he might get found. So, and you can tell this is incredibly difficult for him because he sits up and he's just sitting there. The guy walks into the room, he doesn't even react initially. He's just like kneeling there like with a 1,000-yard stare, and then he realizes the gun is there and picks it up and shoots this guy a bunch of times. But yeah, you can tell he is disassociating in this moment.
Very much so.
And I think it's a scene that adds a lot to the film in kind of grounding it and making it giving it some weight that I don't think the book has. Which again, the book's doing a different thing. I don't think you necessarily have to do something like this, but I think it definitely gives the movie an added layer of, gravitas, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But then we're kind of almost immediately back to hijinks.
Yeah, I mean that is this movie is a tonal roller coaster. I think it rides it very well. But I can see some people being like, okay, so you're gonna do this thing where he's like dissociating and like dealing with death and murdering somebody, and then immediately we're like the most like Looney Tunes hijinks ever. With your next question.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. Because he's at the house still, and he calls Perry. And then there's a dog.
Yes, and his finger has been ripped off.
Yes, his finger has been ripped off again, and he's put it back on ice.
Yeah.
But the dog steals it.
Yeah.
And has it in his mouth.
Yes.
And he's freaking out for multiple reasons.
Yes.
But also partly because like if he leaves his finger here.
Yeah. It's got a fingerprint.
It's got a fingerprint on it.
Literally. And DNA and everything.
Yeah. But then the dog swallows it.
Yeah.
And he's on the phone and he's like, actually, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
Like, well, I guess that problem sorted itself out. Yeah. No, it's great. I love that moment.
Does a dog eat a finger in this book?
Yeah, no. Again, the book is not silly in this sort of way. It's more lighthearted than the movie is at times, but it's also not like comedic in the way that the movie is. It's more kind of just like a straightforward mystery adventure book kind of thing with some quippy fun, but mostly just kind of like a mystery. And so no, none of this happens in the book. This is all movie stuff with the finger and the dog eating it and all of that. But I love it. It's definitely all better in the movie stuff for me.
So the next place that we go in the movie is a mental hospital that is owned by the big bad, Harlan Dexter. Is there anything in the book with a mental hospital?
Yeah, yes, actually. As I mentioned earlier, so basically this entire part comes from the book. The villain in the book does the exact same plot, which is that he kidnaps, whatever. Slight difference. In the book, it's his stepdaughter. In the movie, it's his daughter, like his paternal daughter, whatever the word you want to use. But yeah, so in the movie, it's his daughter. In the book, it's his stepdaughter. But in the same thing, he ends up committing her, like secretly committing her to. She comes back from a trip. She has sued him for over her mom's estate, basically. She comes back from a trip. He secretly stashes her in this mental institution, locks her up there, and then uses a fake daughter to drop the lawsuit, essentially. So that's all. And then that fake daughter kind of assumes her life, basically. That's all identical to what happens in the book. I will say there's but the specific thing with the mental hospital, I have two notes about the mental hospital plotline that I think are better in the book to some extent. One of them is Sherlock Holmes. There's this character in the book, and this may be problematic. I don't know. This is tough. I don't know. There's a lot of layers to this that maybe it's problematic in different ways. Maybe it's not. I'm really not the kind of I don't know. But he goes to visit this mental hospital at one point because he gets a lead that leads him there in the book, and he meets this character while he's there, who's this guy. And I think it's at least similar to the book or to the movie in how problematic it is in its depiction of people with mental illness, or in a mental institution or whatever. But he gets there and there's this old guy there who's like whispering and talking to him while he's waiting to go talk. He wants to go talk to like the head of the hospital or whatever. And while he's waiting, this old guy comes up who's a patient there, and tells him he's Sherlock Holmes and he's working on a mystery and he's got like these leads and all this sort of stuff, and he's like doing all this like very hush hush whispering to, because he knows Mike Shane is a PI because he's seen him in the news or whatever, because Mike Shane is like famous at this point. And so he's seen him in the news and stuff. So he's like, oh, I can trust you with this secret. There's a murder. There's a blah, blah, blah. And he's like, again, he thinks he's Sherlock Holmes. But he mentions this plot about the Duchess was killed. He says, oh, the Duchess was taken or blah, blah, blah. And it ends up, he was witnessing real events, but translating them into this kind of fantasy world of like Sherlock Holmes and stuff. But he did see what transpired at this mental institution, and his story kind of lines up with what actually happened, but just with this layer of like fantasy over it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I thought that was interesting. There's a part about that later where he goes back and sees Sherlock Holmes again, which is a little weird. We'll talk about, but I kind of liked that. None of that shows up in the movie. I just thought it was interesting that, there's a separate guy who also saw the same thing, but it's kind of hidden behind this layer of, whatever. Second thing that I think is better in the book that I think the movie, I understand why they did this, but in the movie, the hospital is owned / run by Harlan Dexter. And the movie mentions he was an actor turned like entrepreneur, and apparently the entrepreneurial avenue he took was running mental it's such a very
interesting business move.
It's such a strange thing, and the reason it exists is that they need an explanation in the movie for why Dexter was able to like have this mental institution take his daughter and like keep her there. And in the movie, their explanation is, well, it's his, like he runs it, it's all corrupt, blah blah blah. In the book, we find out that the mental institution is, the doctor who runs it is like corrupt, basically. And we meet this doctor. He's a whole separate character. It's like Dr. Patterson or whatever. He's basically in with like the mob, the local mob. And there's all this like kind of political intrigue and connections and stuff. And Stallings was through the mob connected with this hospital. And that's how he ferried his daughter off there to be like basically held prisoner. So that's, again, I understand why the movie changed it to kind of eliminate some of these extra characters that the book has. Sure. To kind of streamline things and just be like, oh, it's just Harlan Dexter. But it just feels a little weird. Like, he's an actor who now runs a mental hospital. Like, what? It's just a little strange. I don't know. It didn't feel as believable as the book's explanation, but it's also less complicated. Than the book's explanation.
Well, I mean, in the movie, all you have to do is say one line.
And then show the building where it says like Dexter Mental Institute or whatever. So like, sure, it's fine. It feels a little clunky and clumsy to me compared to the books, which makes more sense, but is again more convoluted and takes more characters and explaining.
So then Harry and Perry are there investigating, and they get captured by this orderly guy who I don't think is actually connected to any of it.
But he's corrupt. Like he knows what's going on.
Okay.
Because he threatens to kill them, and like he's very much like corrupt, working for Dexter, is aware of the plot and he's
okay.
Yeah, he's very much like not a good guy. Like he's not just like a random orderly.
Okay.
Like who doesn't know anything.
So anyway, he is holding them at gunpoint, but then they manage to get the gun from him.
Yeah.
And so my question is, do any of the characters in the book try to do Russian roulette with the single bullet in the gun and then just immediately accidentally kill the guy?
Yeah, so no, none of this happens in the book. And again, I love this scene. It's better in the movie for me. It's ridiculous in like the best way possible. It's so absurd. The first time I watched this scene, I think I laughed like nonstop for like 10 minutes when we watched this in college for the first time, because I just was so unexpected. It was that kind of like I just was not.
Yeah, but it's another kind of like subversion of a trope.
Yeah. And my favorite detail of the whole scene is he puts the one bullet in the 6-shooter or whatever, like a revolver, and spins it and then pulls it up and shoots him, and he's like, what? And he's like starting to like count on his fingers. He's like, wait, I put one, and he's like, it's like it should have been like an 8% chance. And Perry goes, 8? Who taught you math? And it's my favorite, which is also a callback to Who Taught You Grammar.
Yes.
from earlier. But I love that detail, and I love that line so much. And yeah, no, none of that comes from the book, but it is a delightful, ridiculous comedy beat.
But then after that, so that they get away from the orderly, but then they're almost immediately captured by Harlan Dexter and some of his goons. And then there's a torture scene. So is there a torture scene in the book?
No, not specifically. There is a scene where Harlan or where Mike Shane gets beat up by some thugs, but not like they're not like torturing him or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this doesn't come from the book. And I do like the scene despite some, problematic undertones to the scene.
Right.
But I really do. One of my favorite moments in the scene is Robert Downey Jr. repeatedly yelling at Perry to stop helping because Perry's like egging on basically insinuating that the guy torturing them is gay and like trying to attack his like manliness or whatever, his manhood. And this keeps making the guy more angry, so he keeps shocking Harry more, and he's just like, stop helping, which is great. And then Perry has a gun hidden in his crotch, and he ends up shooting this guy with it. And the other moment, that's the other line that I really like from this scene, is he's like, homophobes never check there. Because he hides his Derringer, which they introduced. They set up earlier in the film. He has this little tiny Derringer.
Little tiny BB gun.
Yeah, and he apparently puts it in his underwear. And yeah, he's like, homophobes never check there. Which I thought was great. But yeah, none of that comes from the book.
So they get away, and a whole bunch of stuff happens that I'm not even sure I could begin to recount correctly.
It's chaos, yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of just chaos.
It's a big chase
in this big chase scene. But Harmony has hijacked the van, the mental hospital van that has the daughter's corpse in it, and everybody's chasing her. And then at one point, both Harry and Perry get shot with the same bullet.
Yeah.
Like it goes through Perry and hits Harry.
Yeah.
Do two characters get shot with the same bullet in this book?
No, and I don't think anyone gets shot in the whole book. And definitely neither of our main characters, Tim nor Mike Shane, get shot. They both get their asses kicked several times in different ways, but nobody gets shot.
Mm-hmm.
I truly don't think anyone in this book gets shot. Shane gets shot at once or twice in a couple scenes, but he does not. Nobody gets shot. He doesn't shoot anybody, and nobody gets shot. I don't think, unless I'm misremembering. So.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Far less shooting in that book than I would have expected.
I'll get to it here on your last question. Yeah.
Okay, so my last question here. So like I said, this final chase scene, like big action beat, is kind of chaos. This like big climax. And so basically the coffin with Veronica's corpse in it ends up like falling over the edge of an overpass, but then it catches on like the big highway sign, and it's just like sitting there. And then later on after that, Harry also like flips over the overpass and is like on top of the coffin, and then he slides off and he manages to catch the hand of the corpse.
Yes.
And he's like dangling over the highway and shooting, and he manages to shoot.
The gun falls and he catches the gun.
Yeah, the gun falls and he catches the gun. And he's shooting, and he manages to shoot the guys that are in the car driving underneath him.
Yeah, Andy shoots Harlan Dexter.
Yeah, Andy shoots Harlan Dexter. So, all of this to say, at any point in this book, does anyone dangle over a freeway while holding a corpse's hand and shooting at the bad guys?
Have you ever shot a gun whilst diving through the air screaming, ah? I can't remember the line, but Hot Fuzz. It just the way you wrote that reminds me of that scene from Hot Fuzz where Nick Frost is like, have you ever dove in through the air shooting a gun? No, so none of this happens, and I have mixed feelings on this. So the whole movie is fairly ridiculous.
Yes.
But this is like particularly over the top silly to me.
Yes.
I do think it's intentional because they mentioned earlier in the film that every Johnny Gossamer book, which is basically the Mike Shane stand-in of this
the
film.
Mike Shane of this universe.
Yes. Every Johnny Gossamer book ends in a crazy shootout. Ironically, as you alluded to in the last question, this book does not. There's like very little shooting at all. The climax of this book is them all standing in a room and Mike Shane just like Columboing, like explaining what happened basically. But it does feel a bit silly to me. Like I don't dislike the ending of this movie, like the climax and the big action sequence, but it doesn't. It's maybe my least favorite part because it just feels a little wrong. I don't know. Something about it just doesn't feel like we've not to this point. And again, I think it's intentional because I think it's a callback to this is how this story has to end with a big crazy shootout or whatever and like nonsense. But it just, while the movie is ridiculous throughout, it never feels so
unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable. Whereas this is just like complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Like again, we also have no setup for Robert Downey Jr. being able to really shoot a gun.
Right. And I think that would be like the sticking point for me is that he does suddenly get very good at shooting.
Yeah.
In this last scene. Like the ridiculousness of it I can forgive because the whole movie is ridiculous.
Right.
But he does get very good at shooting all of a sudden.
Yeah, and again, I think the movie just kind of doesn't care. Like it's just again, it's doing the thing where it's like,
and like
we
ultimately
know.
it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter, and it's like, yeah, we know, like it's silly, but like that's the point. That's how this has to end, and it doesn't make sense that this guy is like a crack shot all of a sudden. Like they just don't care because it's not the point. But that being said, it is. I don't know. I don't know what I would rather the ending have been. But this ending does feel a little less than perfect to me. I guess I don't know. But again, I don't dislike it. I think it's fine. It's just it's just okay. All right, Katie has one question for Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
Okay. So when they pull the girl's body out of the lake in this movie, Harry notices that she's not wearing any underwear. He pulls her skirt down. Because he's a nice guy, right? Yeah.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
But then later on, he's like thinking back on it, and he has a realization about her not wearing any underwear. And then this eventually leads them to conclude that she was in the mental hospital. Do people not wear underwear in mental hospitals? And I know this is probably isn't something that the book can answer, but like I don't understand why her not wearing underwear tips them off to that specifically. Like maybe she just wasn't wearing underwear. I don't understand the A to B connection between like, oh, she's not wearing underwear. That means she must have been in a mental institution.
Yeah. So I will say I agree that this is a bit of a stretch that the movie asks you to. It's a little bit of a leap that the movie asks you to take. But it does come from the book. I'll say that first. This is straight out of the book. This is how basically one of the things that lets Mike Shane crack the case, essentially. But going back, I do think generally this can be the case from my understanding, depending on, I think it depends on a lot of things, mainly like the type of institution and like why the person is in the institution. There definitely would be, and also the time period, obviously. But as far as I know, there are some patients who aren't allowed certain things like underwear or whatever if they're like maybe a suicide risk or something like that, mainly because now maybe they would get a special type of underwear. I don't know. But like basically because like underwear with like elastic and stuff could be used to create whatever, something, which is the same reason like basic. I think it's a similar thing with like prisoners who are under certain like suicide watches or whatever, where they aren't allowed like certain types of like sheets and stuff, what I mean, like stuff like that. The reason, so moving on, again, I don't know that for sure. That's just what I've absorbed from media. I don't know how true that is, and I don't know how true that remains to this day. May have been more true 60 years ago than it is now. It may have never been true. I don't know, but I think that's at least somewhat true. But the reason that it tips him off in the movie, and why he makes that connection is that they make a specific note that his daughter is a born-again Christian.
Oh.
Yes, I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, I
I think
didn't
it's
catch
mentioned
that.
2 or 3 times. And one of the times later when he makes that connection, he mentions like, "Oh, that's weird because she's a born again Christian."
Yeah.
Saying like, because I think at some point in the movie somebody makes the thing, and the book does this too, of like, well, that's not that weird. Like, plenty of women, because in Miami, he's like, we're in Miami, tons of women here don't wear underwear or whatever.
Right.
And he's like, well, specifically in the book, he says, well, she's a good upstanding girl because she comes from like a rich family or whatever. And the movie changes that to, oh, she's a born again Christian, so she wouldn't not wear underwear, is the implication.
Okay. I
And
guess.
again, this more so, this whole thing comes from the book, and I think that it's just like they decided to keep it and try to find a way to massage it into a modern story as best as they could. I don't think it works perfectly. But again, that is how Shane realizes that the body him and Rourke dumped was not the same girl that showed up at his apartment. Because when she shows up at his apartment, he realized, or she does have underwear. But then when they dump the body later, they notice that she's not wearing underwear. And then they didn't realize up until the very end that those were not the same bodies.
Yeah.
And there ends up being 2 bodies. But yeah, it's all very ridiculous. I will say there's another thing. He confirms the theory in the book by going back to the mental hospital, and he actually steals the Sherlock Holmes guy's gown to reveal that he's not wearing, because he doesn't know for sure that they don't have underwear. And so he just takes Sherlock Holmes's gown and is like, I was right. They don't have underwear. And then he just leaves. It's weird. But he also is using that. Spoilers, he's going to plant a bunch of evidence in this book that is going to be... This book, Mike Shane succeeds by literally just fabricating evidence that is real in the sense that he's correct about what he's fabricating.
Right.
But he is just fabricating evidence, which I think I'll talk about at some point.
That's an interesting moral conundrum.
He basically plants Sherlock Holmes's mental institution gown in the car of the Stallings, the Harlan Dexter guy, to prove that they were the ones who dumped her body on him earlier or whatever. Like when he got hit by the car and then they dumped the body, he not only he damages the car. The car has been repaired already. Like when he finds it at the end for the big reveal, he goes to the house. The car that hit him has been fixed. It's had its bumper repaired and everything. So he literally takes the car and runs it into the wall to mimic the damage that was on it when it hit him. Again, this is also the 40s or whatever, so they didn't have like advanced forensics or whatever.
Sure.
So yeah, he literally hits the car into a wall to mimic the damage that it would have had when it hit him, and then he plants this gown in the car to be like, so that way when he tells the cops later, hey, this is all what happened, which is what happened. Right. He's not wrong.
But now there's
but the evidence he is providing for this is fake.
Right.
is the
evidence with big air quotes around it.
And now he is not a cop. He is a private eye. So I don't know how that works in terms of like, because if that were to happen in real life, the whole case is fucked. If a cop went and like
the case is getting thrown out immediately.
Done for. I don't know how it worked back in the 40s, but yeah, it was all very ridiculous. The whole thing is crazy, but that is what goes down in the book. Anyways, speaking of the book, I have a few things to talk about that I thought were better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So we talked about this actually in the prequel episode. One of the reviews was talking about how they liked maybe it was Ebert, liked the movie, but thought the kind of meta fourth wall breaking didn't work. And it was funny because at the time I was like, oh, I thought I liked that stuff. On rewatch, I think that kind of meta narrative and the narration have aged not great. Not in like a problematic way, but just in a...
This is of its time.
Of its time, yeah. It for me now, like I think it definitely worked in 2005, and it worked when I watched this movie for the first time in 2010 or whatever. I don't remember what I was in college, but to me, it feels a bit too clever for its own good now. Like we get the thing at one point where like especially some of the narration where Robert Downey Jr. is like, maybe you're wondering, he's at the party and he's like walking through the LA party at the beginning. He's like, maybe you're wondering how I got here, or maybe you're wondering how Silly Putty picks shit up off a newspaper. And it's like, all right, like it's just it's kind of that clever for clever's sake, like look how witty I am kind of writing.
And I get too that I think there's an attempt to mimic like the kind of hard-boiled detective narration, but with like a sarcastic, like modern early 2000s edge to it. But I agree with you. I think it feels very of its time.
Yeah, and so the narration's like that, but then there's a handful of other moments where they like lampshade their own movie, which if you don't lampshade, I think I've explained this before, but lampshading is like if you do something kind of tropey or cliche in a story, but then you call that out as like a rebuff to the criticism.
Hey, we know this is a cliche.
We know this is cliche. We know this is silly. So we're lampshading it by like calling it out. And I think the term comes from like putting a lampshade on a whatever. I don't know. Point being, there's like the scene where they introduce Harlan Dexter and his daughter. They're at the party and they introduce Harlan Dexter and his daughter. And then after that scene happens, Harry comes in the voiceover and is like, so you're probably wondering, like, why am I watching this scene about this random guy and this girl? Who even are they? Why does this matter? Like, obviously that's going to come back at some point. Like, why would they be showing me this if it wasn't? And that whole time I couldn't help but be like, all right, I don't need this.
Yeah.
And the thing that's crazy is the movie's good enough. It does not need that. I completely agree with the critic or whatever who wrote that review now. Maybe it's Ebert. I don't know. Like I said, I don't remember. Totally agree. The movie just does not need this. Like it works fine without like this again lampshading it. They do it again at the end. Perry gets shot, seems like he's dying. He's like coughing up blood, and then we cut after everything resolves, and they're in the hospital, and Perry like wheels in or like in a wheelchair or whatever, and they're like, oh, and like we pause the movie for Harry's voiceover to be like, I know. Oh, look, the one of the main characters that you thought might gonna die is actually alive. Why not bring everybody back? And like all these characters walk through, like the like everybody who
died,
and they bring like Elvis, like they like it's a big over the top thing, and it just feels so self conscious or like so like just do it, just do the thing. Like it feels defensive in a way that feels
yes.
Yeah, it just feels really defensive in a way that is like. Has again, I think that I probably found kind of funny when I first watched it, but watch it again now, it just feels. I don't want to say hacky necessarily, but like, because I think it's still kind of funny, like it still kind of works.
Yeah,
but it's just like, just do it, just do the movie. Like the movie's good. You don't need to like try to convince us that you're smarter than you are. Like it's good. Like it's fine. You don't need to do this. And so that was actually one of my biggest criticisms of the movie this time is that I think if you just cut all of the like fourth wall breaking meta stuff, I think this movie's like better. And again, I don't think it's bad as is. I love it. I like this movie quite a bit. But I think if you just get rid of any time Harry like I don't think you need to get rid of all the voiceover, but you get rid of any of the like meta fourth wall stuff. Yeah. I think this movie is improved.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was funny was that as we were watching it, that like meta narrative breaking the fourth wall narration style also reminded me of The Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah.
Which did come out before this.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, for sure.
Because there's literally like there's a point in both movies where they like literally like stop the film and it's like between two frames.
Yes, and it's like yeah, that's a pretty common. Yeah, that was definitely in vogue at that time period. But yeah, it just doesn't need it. It just doesn't need it, and to me, it just kind of made me roll my eyes every time it happened. When it didn't, maybe even the first couple times I watched this movie, which is interesting because I haven't. It hasn't been that long since I watched like Community, and Community does like a fair amount of lampshading and stuff like that, but it never felt as defensive as this does. For some reason, in particular, that last scene with Perry when he comes back,
very defensive,
felt very like
we're gonna call this out before you
can. So it just felt very like I was like, all right, man, it's fine. We don't. It's a movie. Like we don't. And again, it's like you're making the argument. I don't know. It just felt it just doesn't need it. There's a line in the book that this isn't really better in the book. Some of the stuff that's in better in the book is just stuff I wanted to talk about that I didn't really have anywhere else to put it, and it made me laugh reading the book. But there's a line where when the drunk girl or drugged girl shows up in the beginning and is trying to talk to to Mike Shane, the line in the book is, "He gave first aid by slapping her hard on the cheek." 'Cause
Yeah.
it's that kind of story. And then he shakes her. He literally slaps her and then shakes her to like try to get her to be coherent. I was like, incredible, fantastic. But then right after that, I thought this is a couple really enjoyable scenes. One of them is Tim Rourke and a detective show up, like a police officer show up, and because they got a call because whoever whoever knew the girl was going to be there called the police to try to like frame her or whatever, and so they show up, and he
Is she dead at this point?
No, she's
or-
alive
she's
at this
okay.
point. Shit, no, she is. Now I can't remember because at some
Sorry,
point
I've
during
ruined everything.
it's fine. No, it's fine. It's at some point during the sequence she gets killed, but I can't remember if she's. I think she's dead at this point. I
Okay.
think. No, she is because he realizes she's dead, and then because I think she gets killed when he goes to like see his wife off on the trip, and then when he gets back, she's dead. And then these guys show up, which is Tim Rourke, the reporter, who kind of is like his buddy, and then a police officer, like a captain. And they come to talk to him because they got a tip or whatever. And then he has faked her as being drunk and passed out. He's like put her in bed and made her look like she's asleep and like passed out in his bed, and is like he drank a bunch or drank a little bit and then spilled liquor all over himself and is acting drunk. And so he has this whole scene where he pretends that he's like wasted and the girl is wasted and passed out, so that when these two people show up, he can like pass this off and like they don't realize that she's dead, or specifically the police don't realize she's dead, so that he can try to figure out what is going on. But it's very interesting because he literally pretends to be super wasted and then pretends that he's like having an affair with his wife, and the police captain is really mad at him because he likes his wife, and like he's like, "How you fucking piece of shit, like how would you cheat on your wife?" But he like does this whole thing just so that he can get the police captain out of there so that he can try to sort this all out. I just thought it was an interesting scene.
That is interesting.
During that interaction at one point, there's this great line where the I say whatever, it's just funny to me. Tim Rourke unironically calls some women floozies,
Nice.
which just made me laugh because floozy, it's just incredible. But then right after that, the detective or the police guy leaves, and then he immediately like confesses. He talks to Tim Rourke, and because Tim sticks around, and he's like, "Oh my god, dude, there's a fucking body." He like breaks everything and explains what's going on to Tim, because him and Tim are like friends. And then right after that, he gets another knock on the door, and it's a different police officer with Burt Stallings, who is the Harlan Dexter character. They are there for a different reason. I can't remember why. And then for this one, he has Tim go hide in a room, and he's talking to them. And for this one, he doesn't know why they're there. And so he's like, does this really long, interesting, like slow play of like trying to suss out, because they're not really saying why they're there, but he doesn't know why they're there. So there's this big, like long chess match. Although it's kind of a one-sided chess match because they don't know that he doesn't know. But it's this whole thing where they have this whole conversation because Burt Stallings, there's this whole side plot. There's this whole political thing, which I'll talk about better in the movie that I'm glad they dropped from the movie, where Burt Stallings is running for mayor, the Harlan Dexter equivalent, running for mayor. And there's this other guy named Jim Marsh who is also running for mayor. Mike Shane is backing Jim Marsh.
Ah, okay.
Burt Stallings is his competitor.
Yeah.
And he's being backed by this other cop guy. I can't remember his name now. Who's with him. And so there's this extra layer of like political nonsense going on with all of this. But he doesn't know why they're there. So he does this big, long, slow play of like trying to figure out what they know, because he thinks maybe... Because he knows at this point that the girl is Helen Stallings, who is the stepdaughter of this Stallings guy, but he doesn't know if they know that she was there. He doesn't know what they know. So this is the whole big thing of like
trying to figure out
what they know and what's going on and why are they here, that I just thought was really interesting. Anyways, it's all very fun. after that all goes down, they got to get rid of the bodies. So he has Tim go get a rental car, and the company that he gets a rental car from is called You Drive It, which I just thought was funny. I don't know if that was a real company back in the day, but I hope so. I mentioned it earlier, but the thing that is not in the movie that is in this book, and they drink quite a bit in the movie, but in this book, they drink constantly. I cannot stress enough how much the characters in this book drink. This whole story takes place over the course of like 2 or 3 days tops. And every single scene, they are drinking hard liquor. Like a lot of it. Like every scene. Like there's not a scene that goes by in this book where they're not grabbing a bottle of rye or cognac, and specifically Mike Shane drinks cognac like constantly. And it's every scene. They're just drinking and drinking. And I'm like, and they don't even sleep. I'm like, what, how do you even exist? I don't even understand how he functions as a human being. And then it's so funny at the end. They talk about, there's this line where Mike Shane, he is at one point he has his whole he has this big Columbo moment, and then it ends up being wrong, and then he has to escape from them, and then after he gets away, he ends up at Tim Rourke's apartment, and he gets drunk, and then Tim shows back up, and Tim is like, "Oh, you're drunk," and he's like, yeah, like I'm in it or whatever. And Tim's like, well, that's good because, maybe you can actually figure things out now because you work best drunk or something like that. And I'm like, you've been drinking the entire... I cannot stress enough that every page of this book basically talks about how much they're drinking, which is nonstop. It's every scene. Every scene they are drinking. It's insane. But anyways, Mike Shane definitely died of liver failure at like 40. There's just no way. There's no way. But speaking of, there's a scene in the book that I enjoyed where he has to go to this nightclub. He gets a lead about talking to some mobster who's a character who's not in the movie named Bugler, who's like a mobster guy who supposedly the daughter has been like hanging out with. And that ends up being a whole separate thing. That's very complicated to explain, but he's this mobster and he goes to like talk to this guy, but when he gets there, there's these are the two muscle guys, Donk and some other guy, and they won't let him in because they know who he is and stuff, so they beat him up. They take him out to the beach and they like beat the shit out of him, and he tries to beat him up, but he fails because Donk is like this gigantic like muscle.
His name is Donk.
Yes. Beat the absolute living shit out of him, and he like passes out on the beach from getting his face caved in. But then he wakes up, he staggers back to his car, like later that night, opens his glove box, pulls a bottle of cognac out of it, drinks the whole thing, and the last line of the chapter is, he still hadn't talked to Arch Bugler yet. And he goes right back to the club to go right try to talk to him again and has to like fight these guys. It cracked me up. He just gets his face caved in, drinks a bottle of cognac, and immediately goes back to try to, it's like, I'm not done. I didn't hear no bell. I'm not done yet. It's fantastic. We get a title drop in the book, which was fun. I wasn't expecting that. At one point, because the body keeps disappearing and showing up like kind of randomly, and at one point Rourke wonders aloud to Mike Shane. He's like, I wonder where her body will turn up next, and Shane responds by saying, "Bodies are where you find them." Title drop. Another great line from the book. At one point, he goes to Stallings' estate. Again, Stallings is the Harlan Dexter stand-in. He has a big fancy mansion on like an island in Miami. And he goes to this big mansion to try to get some information. And he is, because essentially also in this one, Stallings like kind of hires him to try to find his daughter, like as like a kind of a ploy, basically. So he goes there to try to get some information. And he ends up he encounters the lady who like runs the house. She's not the maid. She's like I don't know what the term was, like caretaker or something. And we're introduced to her with this line. She opens the door and he is greeted by, quote, "A big-bosomed militant female challenged him with a coldly suspicious gaze," end quote. Which is just great. I love that. As I mentioned, there is kind of a rug pull where Shane thinks he solves it. And he like does the big Columbo moment where he goes and he gets them all and he gets the cops there and he's like, actually, the body in the morgue is not Helen Stallings. It's this other girl. And we can prove that because there's a whole subplot where Helen Stallings, who is the daughter character in this one, or stepdaughter in the book's instance, she ended up marrying some side character who's not in the book at all, or not in the movie at all. Like secretly got married to some other guy, and that there's this whole thing with like a legal dispute over the estate of her mom, and her being married would cause issues with her getting her mom's estate. I don't know. It's complicated and I can't explain the whole thing. Point being, there's this guy named Marlowe who was married to Helen, who is the daughter. And Shane has this plan. He's like, look, that's not, they did a fake. They did a body swap. They didn't kill Helen Stallings. Helen Stallings is being held in the mental institution. This is some other woman that they killed. This is another woman that they used to drop the lawsuit and then killed. And that's kind of true, but not the whole truth. And so but his plan is we'll take Marlowe to the morgue and he'll be able to tell you that's not my wife that I married because he knows her. And they get there and Marlowe's like, no, that's her. And he like loses his shit. And they're like, no, he's not. And it's clear that he's not acting. And this is when we find out that she is actually dead. And they ended up just killing both of them, which is the same thing in the movie.
Yeah.
When they killed the pink hair girl was doing the same thing. The pink hair girl is the equivalent of, she's the stand-in for the daughter, basically. Again, it all plays out slightly different in the book, but very similar. But so we have this big moment where he thinks he solved everything. But then it turns out, oh, he did not have it all figured out. And he has to he literally jumps out the window of the morgue and runs away. And that's when he steals the UPS truck, and has to escape, which I thought was fun. And then my last better in the book note was that Tim Rourke, after that whole thing where he gets his plan blows up in his face, and he's now wanted for murder because they think he killed her because she was dead in his apartment. Tim Rourke writes an article about Shane and about him being wanted for murder, but there's this kind of details about how he writes it in a way because he's friends with Shane and he knows that he's not guilty. He writes it in a very specific way to kind of cast doubt in the mind of the. I just thought it was to cast doubt in the mind of the reader on whether or not Shane is guilty and that kind of thing, which just sounded kind of interesting. But it's not that important. Whatever. All right, let's go ahead and talk about what I thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
I mentioned earlier, but I really like the backstory of Harry and Harmony having known each other as children, and also that kind of setting up. I forgot the detail of after she pretends to be getting cut in half, and then her dad comes up and it cuts with him about to hit her, kind of subtly setting up that he's abusive. Not just in that way, but anyways, I thought that I like that backstory. I absolutely adore the whole scene where he runs from the cops and ends up in the audition and he's freaking out because his partner just got shot. And then the audition is about his partner getting killed. And he just is great in them. I love that scene.
Yeah, the whole conceit of how he ends up in LA, I thought was great.
Yes, it's so much fun. It's so silly, but it's fantastic. I mentioned it earlier, but I think the movie makes a lot of sense to just drop the politics plot line where the two people are running for mayor and they're tied up. It's just too much. I think it's fine in the book, but in this movie with everything else going, I'm more interested in the backstory with Harry and Harmony and stuff, and the whole plot of him being an actor and all this sort of stuff is more interesting. I didn't need the politics plot. And even in the book, it feels a bit like an afterthought. And it's really primarily there to motivate Shane to actually take the case. Because otherwise he might have, if this woman showed up and wasn't tied to this political case that he's involved, or this political race that he's involved in, he probably just wouldn't have done it. But the book needed a very concrete reason for him to need to get involved in this. Because again, she tells him that she has information about Stallings that could potentially influence the election. So now he needs to be involved because he wants Jim Marsh to win because Stallings is going to revoke his PI whatever. Like he's gonna lose his job essentially if Stallings wins, so he needs Marsh to win. So that's his personal stakes in it. It's fine, but it's not really necessary in the movie. I prefer the backstory with Robert Downey Jr. and everything, and why he's involved. I just think is more interesting. I really love this line in the movie. It's just like a throwaway line, but I thought it was very funny when he's at the LA party and the woman asks what he does, and he says, I'm retired. I invented dice when I was a kid. It's just a very funny line to me. I like that when we set up that he's like reunites with Harmony and they're like hitting it off. But then we cut to the next morning and he wakes up in bed and the camera rolls over and reveals that he was in bed with her friend. I just thought that was very funny. Like, again, lots of little character details. He's a self-sabotaging asshole with very little kind of, exposition. I really like the scene where Perry like leads Harry on about the woman that hired him when they go on that thing, the reconnaissance mission at the lake, and Harry's like, oh, so like, oh, a woman hired you. Like when you got there, did she come on to you? And Perry's like, yeah, she had nothing on but the radio. And then she called me in and she sat on my lap. And he's like, no, you fucking idiot. She called me on the phone and paid me with a credit card. He's like, I just love that he like leads on like again, it feels a little bit like a shot at the kind of story that this book is, that kind of traditional, ridiculous.
She strode into my office with legs as long as her list of problems.
Exactly. And I love that he sets it up like that and then just pulls it right out from under him. It's very funny. I love the callback of Harry trying to correct Perry's grammar and then Perry being like, what badly is an adverb? Who taught you grammar? And that's a classic. The Coen brothers do that a lot where characters will hear, especially protagonists, like this happens in The Big Lebowski a lot, where he will hear a different character say something that he knows is like smart, and so then he'll try to do it later, like try to copy it and like use it like as his own thing. And again, it just tells us a lot about the kind of person that Harry is. Just kind of like a fast talker, smooth talker who's kind of like absorbs shit without really understanding it and just kind of like tries to repeat it. But I love that line. Who taught you grammar? The scene where after a bunch of stuff happens, but where Harmony's laying in bed and the spider crawls like into her bra. Yeah. And Harry does not know what to do. And he's like flicking and he's like, because he just freaks out and doesn't know what to do. I love that. I think it's very funny.
She was very calm.
This is true.
For someone who found a piece of spider in her bra, because she finds like a leg.
Yeah. And she's like, oh, you weren't lying.
Looks down at it, is like, oh, you were being honest or something. And I would be stripping and crying.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, where's the rest of that spider?
Yeah. No, nightmare. Absolutely. I love the little at the end when he gets shot, and then he comes down to Harmony. The bullet goes through Perry, hits him. He comes down to Harmony, and she's like, "Oh, you've been shot." And he goes, "Actually, look." And he pulls the Johnny Gossamer book out that he had in his like lapel or whatever. And she's like, "Oh, it's stopped," which is like the classic this kind of thing where like some token of affection or whatever stops the bullet. She's like, "Oh, it stopped the bullet," and then she holds it and sticks her finger all the way through it, and he's like, "Oh, not really." And he's just got a bullet hole in him. I love that.
I thought that particular fake out I really liked. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah. There's a scene in the book that the movie completely drops where Shane, after Shane's big reveal and like theory like blows up in his face and he's on the lam essentially, he goes down to the harbor, like the bay at Biscayne Bay in Miami, and he needs to get to the other side of the bay. So he finds this black guy. Book does not use that word.
Like a dock worker?
Yeah, no, a fisherman. There's like a guy like out like fishing, like just hanging out. Yeah. To be clear, the book does not use the N-word. It uses the N-word, but like the socially acceptable N-word non-slur one. Yeah. Anyways, point being, he goes down there and talks to him, and he has this whole conversation with this guy, and he actually like code switches. Like, so the character in the book has a very pronounced accent, as written in the book, and Mike Shane like code switches and starts like kind of doing like a voice. Yeah. I say a voice. I don't know. He's doing some slang and stuff that is very much. it feels rough, but also I don't know. I'm not sure I have the historical. I don't know. It just I'm glad. I think the movie is better for not having included something similar to this scene. The last thing I had that is a line from the movie that I really enjoyed, and again that felt like some of the movie is really up and down in whether how progressive it is.
Yeah.
But I thought there's as they're walking through the hospital when Perry is recovering after he gets shot. He has some, I don't remember the context of this, but they're talking about something, and Harry says something about like men wearing dresses or something like that. And Perry says to him, "That's cross-dressing, you idiot. Half those guys are straight."
Yeah.
Which I thought was, again, the movie like kind of, pointing out like, look, it's not basically saying like it's not as black and white as like that, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I got a handful of things to talk about in the movie. Nailed it.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
So again, the main thing that I mentioned, the general conspiracy murder plot, pretty similar. The nuts and bolts of like the plot are fairly similar. I think in both the book and the movie, the woman, she's wearing like a blue silk dress, which is like a very specific detail that they mention. And she is in the movie as well. There's a mention in the books, when he goes and talks to one of the maids at the Stallings estate, she sneaks out to talk to him to like give him some information, and she mentions that Stallings would look at Helen, who is his stepdaughter, lustfully, and in the book Shane is like, it's fine. He's her stepdaughter. Like, it's not that weird. Yeah. Exactly. But I think this may be where the movie pulled kind of the incest plot line from is this particular exchange. Because I think that inspired. So like the whole plot in the movie is that Harmony's sister was abused as a child by her actual father. And so Harmony told her that that wasn't her real dad. Her real dad is this famous actor from the Johnny Gossamer movie or whatever. And then when she goes to find him, she sees him like canoodling with the woman who is pretending to be his daughter, but she doesn't realize he's pretending to be his daughter, so thinks it's actually his daughter, and it becomes a whole thing, blah, blah, blah. I have mixed feelings on this whole plot as well. I like the fact that it's a mystery that isn't really a mystery. Like I do like that in mystery sometimes where like this, in a plot where all of these crazy things are happening and all these mysterious things are happening, this one thread of it is kind of simple, that it is just, oh no, she actually did just kill herself because of, like it is what the thing you thought it was is what it was. There isn't really like these extra layers going on. The explanation for it is a little more complicated, but there isn't like some grand conspiracy. I tend to like that kind of storytelling element in a mystery sometimes. In this particular one, I don't know. Having it just be like she saw a guy who she thought was her dad being incestuous after her dad was incestuous, and that is why she kills herself, is like just not my favorite
it's
plot line.
Not great.
Yeah, it's not my favorite plot line. So I think there's problems there, but I don't know. So yeah, again, I think the whole point of this being that the movie, I think, pulled that specific element of the plot from the book, like a just like one brief line from the book. And then finally, the movie does nail problematic opinions on women. It's very different. So the book is from the 40s or whatever, and it's obviously awful.
Right.
But the way it's awful is that women just don't really matter at all. They're just like, they're just like kind of there to serve the men, whatever the men are doing, basically. But I would argue that the movie also has some kind of fairly problematic opinions about women that are voiced by Harry in a way that I feel are both simultaneously supposed to be like true, but also like he's a dick.
Yeah.
So like,
I do feel like that is ultimately what the movie is saying with some of his opinions. Like, it's true, but he shouldn't say it.
He shouldn't say it. Like, he's a dick for saying it, and like we're not supposed to like him for saying it, but also he's secretly telling the truth, kind of, is what it feels like. And you said it earlier, like he's a nice guy. That this movie suffers big time from kind of like nice guy
Yes.
energy of like where he is a nice guy. He you know, and it fluctuates back and forth between like I think some good moments and some bad moments. Like the moment where he stands up for her and he tries to stop that guy from like touching her or whatever. Obviously that's not like a big thing, but it's like, what, okay, fine. But then like immediately after that, having her go home with that guy feels like the movie being like, well, see, actually women are dumb, like, and they will go home with that kind of guy, even, you know, blah, even if you try to tell them that he's a, you know, you try to help them,
even though you're here and you're like a nice guy
who tried to defend them. Now look, they're still going home with the asshole. And then the scene later where with the spider, again, or kind of on the flip side of that, the scene with the spider, I actually think it's kind of interesting when he like touches her boob and she's like, oh, did you just grab my boob? And he's like, no, well, there was a spider and blah, blah. And then she's like, when she finds the spider, she's like, oh, that's, you know, that's fine. Like, oh, there was a spider. And he's like, no, she says, oh, it's not that big of a deal. She's like, oh, you grabbed my boob, it's fine. Like, it's whatever. Yeah. And he's like, that's not, like, I think there's kind of something positive and negative in the scene of him being like, no, it's a big deal. You shouldn't just like brush off the fact that somebody like molested you, you know what I mean? Like if you thought I actually like groped you, you shouldn't just like, who cares it? But also that it's mixed with like a weird protection of her purity that like it's all
well, and
like,
and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in that scene too, he like immediately follows it up by being like, is this the kind of guy that you associate with? Like immediately goes directly into victim blaming.
Yes, exactly. And that's, the movie fluctuates through that a lot. And it kind of combines somewhat like progressive ideas about like that stuff mixed with very much like the nice guy, shitty.
I'm such a nice guy. Why doesn't she want me? I'm such a nice guy.
Yeah, this whole rant about women in LA being like damaged goods and stuff. And again, you're not supposed to like him in the moment, but you are supposed to be like, but actually he's probably good. Yeah, and again, it's
also a hell of a thing to say to somebody that you know was like abused as a kid.
Yes, yeah. Well, actually, I don't know if it's implied that she was. To be fair, well, she was hit, I guess.
Yeah,
but like I don't know if she.
I felt like it was implied that she probably.
Okay,
also
I mean,
was.
probably yes.
Like pretty unlikely. I think that she was not.
I would agree. I don't know if the movie ever explicitly says it, but I think you're right that it's definitely the implication. But yeah. Anyways, that's what I have for the movie Nailed It, plus a bunch of other stuff that we already talked about in the earlier stuff. So let's get to a few odds and ends before the final verdict.
So the movie opened up, and after that little intro, when they get to the LA party, I was like, hey, it is Christmas.
Yeah.
So it is.
It absolutely is Christmas. It is. And then and then what's her name runs around in a Santa costume for half of the movie because she's working at a party where she's wearing like a go-go Santa outfit. There is a little thing in the book that I thought was really funny. They go to a hotel at one point, and I don't know, maybe I misinterpreted this or whatever, but Mike Shane meets what he calls the house detective. And I was like, wait, does this hotel have like its own private eye?
They have a PI on staff,
like you have like a retainer. Chauffeur and like a maitre d' or whatever and a PI, I guess. Like it's just very strange. I don't know if that's what that meant or what, but that's what it seemed like to me, was that this hotel had a house detective. If you know anything about house detectives, if that was a thing, let me know.
The other thing that I noted right away in this movie was that the casting agent who quote unquote discovers Harry is the dad from 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yes, he is.
Which is a movie that I love and adore with every fiber of my being.
Yeah. He's barely in this movie.
Yes, he is.
He's in like the very beginning, and that's about it. But
he plays a very different character than in 10 Things I Hate About You. So we didn't really talk about the Johnny Gossamer books throughout this episode, but there is kind of a recurring thing that particularly Harmony, but also to some extent Harry. Yeah. When they were kids together, they read Johnny Gossamer books, which are like this series of hard-boiled detective novels.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a nice like nod to the Michael Shane series.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely the Michael Shane books of this universe, and in fact, one of the books is what this movie was going to be called at one point. I can't remember. One of the books she's reading in the movie was like I was talked about it in the prequel episode, but one of the books she was reading was going to be the title,
like the original title.
Yeah, whatever it was, I can't remember.
I don't remember it. I remember talking about that, but I don't remember what the title was.
But yeah, no, that's definitely our, and that like all the cover art and stuff is very similar to the, very much inspired by the cover art from this. But yeah. I think it's Mr. Frying Pan, or whichever, one of the two henchmen guys, the guy who doesn't get killed. Well, I guess he does get killed.
There's the guy who gets killed by the like food cart guy.
Yes, the guy who gets killed by the food cart guy. We only see his face like once in this movie, but he looks so much like Angel, like David Boreanaz, like Angel from Buffy. It fucking killed me when we pops up and we see his face at one time. I was like, Angel? What are you doing here, bud? It was very strange.
My last note here that I noticed, and this was driving me absolutely insane in this scene. So when Perry is tailing the pink-haired girl in the park, they're walking through the park, and they're like the only two people in the park at night. And he's tailing her from like 10 feet behind her.
Terrible job.
Like, first of all, you're doing a terrible job.
Yeah.
Secondly, you should have known that this was a setup, because literally any woman would have been extremely aware of him in that moment.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's ridiculous. I don't know if you noticed this. I thought this was funny. I didn't realize this, and I was just scrolling through the credits, and I saw the pink-haired girl. I thought she looked vaguely familiar, but then I was like, oh, she's Lady Jocelyn from A Knight's Tale, like the love interest.
Yeah. I did not notice that. Yeah. She looks very different.
It's very interesting
than she does in A Knight's Tale.
I don't know what happened. Like she's like the lead in A Knight's Tale, and then she's like a very bit part in this movie. Like a year or two later.
It's interesting.
It's very strange. But anyways.
That's a movie I have mixed feelings on.
Oh, A Knight's Tale?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it since like high school. So
it's one of those movies that like I want to really, really like it. I feel like I should.
Yeah.
And I don't dislike it, but I also don't really like it.
Interesting. Maybe we'll have to do that for a bonus episode sometime.
Yeah, but maybe I should give it a rewatch.
Yeah, because
it's been a few years.
I remember almost nothing about it. I've seen it like once or twice, like forever ago. But it's one of those that I think people like. Generally, like I think people enjoy it. I don't know. I could be wrong.
I think it got kind of a cult classic type.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Had some delayed success.
Yeah, I think critically it was not. It did not do well, but I think it was one of those that like, kind of like the Mummy or whatever that people just kind of like.
Let us know if you want a bonus episode on Patreon on A Knight's Tale.
Yep. Before we wrap up, we wanted to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Goodreads. Drop us a little like or subscribe or whatever so we can hear your opinions on Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. You can also do us a favor by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to us and write us a nice little 5-star review. We'd really appreciate that. Or if you want to support us the most, you can head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Give us a few bucks a month. At the $5 a month level, you get access to bonus content. We just released an episode on The Menu. If you want to hear what we had to say about The Menu, that episode is out now. And we'll be doing another episode next month, in December for our bonus episode. And at the $15 and up level, you get access to priority recommendations, where if you have something that you would really like for us to hear, really like for us to talk about, support us for $15 a month. Send us that recommendation. We will get to it, pretty quickly. This was a patron request from...
This was a request from Ian from Wine Country.
There you go, Ian from Wine Country. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for suggesting Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. It's time for my final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
I actually quite enjoyed Bodies Are Where You Find Them. It's a fun little mystery novel that moves along at a great pace and has some fun twists and turns that keep you on your toes. It is absolutely a relic of its time and is just chock full of misogyny. But if you can get past those things, it's a pretty enjoyable and quick read. The fun thing is that description can pretty much be applied to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang without edit. The movie is very much a relic of its time, and that's what has aged most poorly about it. The film's misogyny is tempered somewhat by actually giving us an interesting and self-possessed female lead, and its fourth wall breaking meta commentary is charming enough to be excused, despite causing me to roll my eyes quite a few times throughout the runtime. What the movie really brings to the table, though, is humor. This movie has a ton of legitimately laugh out loud moments. When the movie isn't getting in its own way trying to be too clever, it absolutely kills, and the mystery puzzle pieces fall into place in a very satisfying manner. And that's what it comes down to for me. This book is good pretty much exclusively for the mystery. The movie is good for the mystery and because it's hilarious. And so for that reason, I have to give this one to the film. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are heading over to the land of animation, and we are going to talk about 101 Dalmatians,
Ooh.
a book by Dodie Smith and the 1961 film.
This is one of those Disney movies that I only watched like once.
I actually quite like this one. I enjoy the art style. It's very unique, in my opinion. I've never read the book, and I honestly mostly kind of want to read it so that I can read the sequel, because I've heard the sequel to 101 Dalmatians is absolutely batshit insane.
Sweet. All right, well, that'll be our next episode. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be talking about 101 Dalmatians, and in 1 week's time, we'll be previewing that and seeing what you all had to say about Kiss Kiss, Bang Bang. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
Keep reading books,
watching movies,
and keep being awesome.